Good morning, Mr. Palmer, sir. How are you?
Doing good, Mr. Deegan. How you doing?
I am wonderful. How is life in sunny, warm, humid Colorado?
It is cold and dry and snowy. But
Nice.
the good news is when it's super cold, the dry is or the it makes and super cold and dry, the snow is super light. So it's not that bad to shovel because it's not wet and heavy.
Mm.
But man, going outside when I woke up this morning, it was -2. When right before when I got my coffee, I checked and it was -6. So it's gone down. It's gone down 4 degrees. I think our high happened at midnight at like -1.
That's not
So
good. That
yeah,
is not good. But you're inside, you're toasty warm,
I am.
and you get to
I
spend
have,
time with me.
yes, I have a brand new camera and brand new lights to keep me warm in here. So
I know, don't people don't have to adjust their video. That really is us.
yeah, I will apologize for the
I
rest
won't.
of the year.
I won't. I mean, I I have a face for radio, but we decided to do video anyways. So hopefully everybody's enjoying it. This will be our second full RUCKCast on YouTube as well as all the usual audio spots. So
Mhm.
hopefully somebody's enjoying it somewhere. We know people are, which is good. And yeah,
One one administrative note that I want to mention real quick, and I didn't bring this up with you, so sorry. Uh,
surprise.
so I got an email last week
Hmm.
from Google,
Uh-oh.
and I'm not quite sure why they sent it to me because um well, but
Neither are they.
Google Podcast is actually going away. So if you listen to the Ruckcast on Google Podcasts, the at the end of March, so end of March, beginning of April, it's going to go away. And so you got to go find us on YouTube Music. Now, I checked that last week because I had a slight panic attack and went, wow, we have a lot of people that actually listen to us on Google Podcasts. So if you're a Google Podcast subscriber user, and at the end of March, beginning of April, you're going to have to switch over to YouTube Music. I checked because I freaked out. I called John and I'm like, John, what are we going to do? And John was like, I think we're already there. So I actually went and found the app, downloaded it, went and looked, and we're there. So, slight little administrative note that it's now official because Google sent it to me as a subscriber, not as a podcast person, that Google Podcast is going away at the end of March. So come April 1st, it's not an April Fool's joke. You're going to have to go find us on YouTube Music.
You would think they would have worked out a better day than April 1st for that. But anyways, and yes, we
It
are
is.
all set up. Everything is over there. So
Yeah. So we're there, but yeah, if you consume us, if you listen to us, consume us, that sounds really bad. If
no,
you
it
listen to
sounds
us
like the
on
Coneheads consume mass quantities.
if you listen to us on Google Podcasts, you can go find us on YouTube Music. Turns out there's an app for YouTube Music. I didn't know it, but there is.
There's
So
always an
go
app
find
for
us
that.
there.
So what do we got on the agenda today, sir? I think we have a
Look,
plan.
we have a plan, and today is the first episode. We're doing a series. We've talked about this a couple times. I think we talked about it on the live stream. I know we talked about it last week, but one of the reasons why we wanted to bring video back to the podcast was so that we could share stuff on the screen. And one of the things that it sort of lends itself to this is this idea that I had, and we talked about it about the 10 things that we all wish that people knew and understood about Wi-Fi. It has nothing to do, well, because Ruckus follows all the standards, which makes it nice because it works with everything, then we still have to follow all the 802.11 standards. But there's certain universal truths to 802.11 that you and I are constantly having to explain to people. And, I started my blog 8 years ago now. Holy Moses. Um, as a way to like not keep telling the same story over and over and over again. I mean, I like to talk, but I'm like, I like to make up new stories, not just rehash the same old ones. So it's like, hey, let's do a whole series about the 10 things that we really wish that everybody knew and understood about Wi-Fi. So some of these, as we go through our series, over the first half of this year, this is going to take us a while to get through this, are going to be stuff that you may know, you may not know, you might need a refresher on, but then it's also something that you can actually send people to and be like, hey, go listen to episode number 4 in the series that these guys did about things that we wished you guys knew about Wi-Fi, because it's stuff that you and I take for granted. And a lot of the people who do Wi-Fi for a living take for granted that everybody knows, but it turns out not everybody knows it. What is that? Common sense isn't common. Well,
Not at
this is
all.
this is Wi-Fi stuff that we think that is common knowledge, but you know what? Most of the time, it's not. Something on this list, somebody's who's not a CWNE, who doesn't do this, is not an SE, is not involved in the business, and be like, "Wow, I didn't realize that." So that's the
And I mean,
plan.
and in some fairness, there's definitely going to be some things I think we talk about that even people in the Wi-Fi world may have either not learned yet or forgotten or not learned well enough. It's always good to knock some rust off, bears repeating, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah,
Yeah.
like you said, a lot of these people. I mean, come on, I'll tee this up with saying this. How many times have you or I, when working with clients, customers, people in the field that we were supporting, said, "Well, it just works at home. It should be easy. It can't be that hard. It's easy, right? I mean, the other joke we
Oh,
always say is it's so easy. It's wireless. There's no wires involved. It's got to be easy, right? And it couldn't be further from the truth. But
I was talking to my son yesterday, who's much older than I care to admit, to be honest with you. I think he's turning 30 this year. So,
wow,
but I was talking to him. I said, I said, cliches are funny because there's a lot of truth behind them. And yeah, you know, how hard can it be to do wireless? How hard is it to not install wires, type of thing? And it's one of those universal truths. And I always tell people all the time, I'm like, Wi-Fi is the one thing that everybody does at their house. Well, the one IT thing that everybody does at their house, and they always do it better than us. And it's just true. You know, how many other people run, enterprise grade switches at their house, or run VMs, or SANs, or, next generation firewalls, or, you know, I mean, big giant virtual farms of, hundreds of servers. I mean, who else does that at their home? You know, I
not
would
often.
I would tell you that about 99% of the people in the world don't know that if they look on the back of the little box that they get from their ISP, there's a couple of switch ports in there. They don't know that. And if they did, they forgot it. So it's like Wi-Fi is the one thing that everybody does at their house, and they always do it better than us. So yeah, um, that's why we're doing this.
Well, let's get to it then.
All right. So I'm gonna figure out how I can share, and I'm gonna share my desktop right here. And I have a slide deck that I have prepared, is a strong word, that I have put together to try to walk through us over these next 10 episodes, so we all kind of know and understand, keep track of where we're going, and it gives us some bullet points to talk off. So with without further ado, let's go with the 10 things that we feel like you need to know about Wi-Fi. And the number one thing that always comes up, that I always like to point out to people, is the client device is always in charge. So that's our one thing. The first thing that I always seem to be telling people, and John, you can chime in here. You know,
It, it reminds me of, and shameless plug. I did a talk. Please don't go watch it, at WPC in Phoenix 2023, and I made a meme. It's a favorite movie of mine, so I kind of butchered the line a little bit on purpose. The line, and if anybody's a movie fan, they'll get it. It's the job would be great if it weren't for the customers. And the meme I made was the Wi-Fi would work great if it weren't for the clients, or something to that effect. And that's the reality of it, right? Like, you're only as good as your, the least capable device. And not every client's going to function the same. I mean, there's a million different anecdotes that we could trot out, but the reality is, you could build the best Wi-Fi in the world, but if you don't build it to the client device specifications, knowing that you've got like a Zebra device out there, well, the Zebra device might not work on the way you've built your network because you built it for, all Wi-Fi 7. Well, Zebra is stuck on 2.4. Not picking on the Zebra device, but just, scanners in warehouses tend to be, I don't want to call it low tech. They're very important, but they're also very robust, and they don't tend to get refreshed as regularly as the latest iPhone or whatever. And people sometimes forget that and they blame it on the Wi-Fi, but the reality is it's a network thing. I mean, you've seen it with drivers and software and chipsets, and it's all going back to the client.
I'm glad you made that one little comment, because I was gonna take exception to something you said, but you got it in there. The problem is, and I found a lot of good information when I was doing my 6 gigahertz work last year. I found a lot of good information on the Zebra website. And then there's a link to it in the presentation I did at WLPC Prague to some of Zebra's documentation. So some of their newer client devices actually do support like 6 gigahertz. So if there's a brand new warehouse and there's a brand new, and they're standing it up, and it's all brand new and they're getting brand new scanners, then the chances of them being 2.4 only is actually kind of low. However, when you think about a warehouse that's been around for 20 years, chances are they're still using the scanners from 20 years ago. So it all comes back to the client's in charge, but you have to know like what the client is capable of and those client capabilities, because they will drive it. So here we go. Let's get into it after we already kind of started. Because as we've been talking about, it all starts with the client. Everything starts with the client. We can have Wi-Fi 7, we can have 6E, we can have Wi-Fi 6, but it always starts with the client, and that's what we were talking about with the scanners. It's so dependent on that device, on the client device, whether it's a phone, and I currently have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 5 phones sitting on my desk right now. And each one of them has different capabilities, and each one of them does things differently. And so, whether it's a Wi-Fi, I have a Wi-Fi 5. I don't know if I have a Wi-Fi 4, because that'd be 11N. I'm not seeing it. I don't have a phone that old, mainly because the batteries all died. Can't get them anymore. But it all kind of starts with a client. And in order to show this off, I went and I found something this morning before we recorded, and I want to show it to you guys. And this is going to be a little mind-numbing for some people, but let's blow this up a little bit. This is some work that I did for one of our customers, a RUCKUS customer last year, where we were working on different things to influence how the client works, how we interact, how the network. And when I say we, I'm talking about the network, right? The people who build the network, we kind of take it on, right? We kind of go, yeah, that's us. That's our network. It's an extension of me. So it's how we interact with the client. And if you look down here at the bottom, you can actually see where it says that there are 800,000 lines on this particular packet capture. So what I want to do, and if you've never looked at a PCAP, let me walk you through it real quick. We have the first frame, number 1, and the timestamp of 0.0s all the way, 6 zeros. And it just happens to be when I hit start on the packet capture. But what I want to do is I want to go find a specific client that is embedded somewhere in this packet capture. And so I use a filter for the WLAN address. You can either set it up as a transmitter or receiver address, TARRA, or just the address. This way I can see it whether it's in my transmitter or my receiver column. We want to look for this particular client right here. Now, this is going to take a second because it's 100,000 lines, or 800,000 lines to filter through. And there's a lot of presentations at WLPC about using Wireshark. So you can go watch those. You can learn about all the filters. There's websites with different, all the different commands to filter. But anyway, we get down here to 344 seconds. So 5 minutes, 45 seconds after I hit start, I get to this client. And if you notice, it's a probe request. but it's coming from the client, right? So this is where it all starts, is the client sending a probe request. Now, what I missed in here, and if you've ever done Wireshark captures, over the air captures, you know that you don't always get everything. But what I missed is the probe response from the AP going back to the client. And then we have an authentication, and this comes from the client going to the AP. And then we have an association request from the client to the AP. And with the authentication and the association, we do see the responses that's coming from the AP on these lines right up here. You can see them changing blue. So it all starts, the probe request, the authentication, and the association. That all starts with the client. The client is the one that sends out that information, and the AP is just sitting there waiting to respond to it. And so when we say that, let me go back here, it all starts at the client, that's literally what I mean, is it all starts at the client.
Well, it does. I mean, the client initiates the connection. It's not like the access point's going to send out beacons saying, "Hey, somebody join me." I mean, it's advertising its presence, but
yeah, it sends out beacons, and there's all this. I mean, we could go back into that and show all kinds of different management frames. I mean, trying to look. Oh, here's my handy dandy little notebook with all my Wireshark.
Mm-hmm. But it really is valuable, and I think, I mean, a plug for something that has nothing to do with us necessarily, but it's one of those where, and we're both CWNEs, but if you take the coursework, you take your CWNA, it starts to make a little bit more sense because you get a little bit of the very surface is scratched. And if you take the CWAP, first of all, it's going to melt your brain, but it gets into the weeds with Wireshark, or I think for me, they used OmniPeak, but it gets into the packet analysis of it, and it goes really, 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 really deep. And it starts to let you really see and understand exactly how much communication is happening between every client device and the wireless network in terms of negotiations, acknowledgments, and things like that. And just, you can see how it all comes together. And the one thing, like Jim, you had on the packet capture that, people forget, I can see that you have an MBR of 24, but that wasn't what the negotiations were happening at.
Well, so two things, right? One, I'm pretty sure that my version of, so this was done, I don't remember which MacBook Pro I was using, but I was using AirTool. And these 6.5s, these data rates that are at 6.5 that we can see here, some of those are potentially a corrupted frame in how the MacBook Pro NIC, because these are M1s. Yeah, I think they're M1s. So you can't always trust the 6.5 data rates, but you can see these 6.0 data rates. Those are valid data rates, right? 6.5s are actually not. But when we see these different, and the other part of this has to do with the fact that because of the testing I was doing, my laptop that I was using to collect this data was much closer to my AP than it was to my client, because I was actually, and you know this story because I did it for you. My laptop was set up inside my house, and I had my little survey tray, like the old school survey tray when you have the laptop that was actually on a tray. I had that with 3 client devices, and as you see, this is actually a Samsung Galaxy A6, one of my older devices. I was actually across the street and down the road a little bit from my house, and so and trying to see like how far away from the AP I'd have to be in order to make that particular test work. And so, but you're right, and there's these 6.5s, and as we keep scrolling down through here, you'll find some, here's some 24s, but here's this probe request. It's a broadcast, that came out at 6. We can't control that, and every time you have a data rate that's lower, it just takes longer to send that information, which then consumes airtime on the channel. You can see that this was all done on channel 48. So in addition to, I did this test specifically because half of, as we saw from the live stream that we did a couple of weeks ago, if you go back and watch that one, you'll see all kinds of congestion I have on Uni 1. And so that was one of the reasons why I was doing this particular test on this one. But here we can see that after all the EAP, this is the EAP exchange because we were doing EAP PEEP. So username and password is the authentication we were doing on this particular test. And then you see the e-poll, which is where we actually still do our four-way handshake. So when we talk, if you ever wonder about 802.11r, 802.11r actually means you only have to do this one time, all these EAP exchanges. That's where the true savings are for 11R. But as we've gotten newer and newer clients, and I think I can show, you know what? I might actually, no, we won't do it today. Don't have time. But then when we finally get up here, then we start seeing these little bit higher data rates, right? Of 57.8, which is an odd data rate. But in 43, 52, that's, you're referencing CWAP. And yeah, the first time I took it, melted my brain. Second time, not so much, but still hurt. And then finally, it's after years and years when you finally go, oh, I can finally understand it. But then we see these block acts coming in at 12. This is all from the client. We don't have, and there's reasons why it's there, but this is all things that, as part of the common air interface that is 802.11, which means that I have an Apple, I have a Google, and I have a Samsung device that, and those are just the phones sitting here. Each one of those devices will work with any AP. I have all the APs over my shoulder. I have other APs. I have, that's how I can take my device and go to all these different places with all these different vendors, is because it's what's known as a common air interface. And this all, it makes it work, but it also means the client's in charge. So when we say it all starts with the client, this is what we're talking about, is we can encourage and provide information, with 802.11r, K, V, reduced neighbor reports, all these things, we can provide that information to the client. But whether or not the client uses it, that's beyond us. I mean, John, what's your favorite saying? You seem to tell it to me all the time.
We could say it depends, but
no, the other one.
Which one? Oh, you can lead a horse to water, but it's not my fault when it drowns.
Or we can't make it drink. Either one.
True. I like the drowns part, but I'm a little bit more of a morbid guy. But this kind of makes me think back to when wireless engineers finally got some traction, and you started to see like any enterprise organization that maybe didn't invest in wireless for a while, and then finally started to pay attention to it, got the gear, the training, etc. You started to tell people we have to turn off 2.4, or we have to limit the 2.4 networks. And this was one of those things where, like, well, because the complaint would always be, well, we've got really bad Wi-Fi. And you look at the spectrum, and 2.4 is just obliterated. There's just so much. It's a hot mess in a lot of places, especially if you're in an urban environment, or I happen to work for places that had a lot of test devices that they required, due to the nature of the testing, they required everyone have their own private network, and you put 10 or 20 wireless networks in a building, in addition to what you're supporting from a corporate perspective, and it's a challenge. And so you say, well, we can't control, if you have 2.4 and 5, I cannot control what network the client joins. But if I turn off 2.4, I can, or if we control which ones are 2.4 and 5. So that's why you see people put like the guest networks are 2.4 and 5 or 2.4 only, or they leave it for the IoT stuff or whatever. You can influence it. You look at certain, depending on the controller architecture, or not, you'll turn it so that you can, or tune it rather, so that you provide a stronger signal on 5 than 2.4, because you want the client to say, oh, look, I like that. That's a stronger signal. But we all remember, any wireless engineers lived through, you could have the best wireless signal on 5 possible, and that stubborn device, and I'm not going to name vendor names, just decides to say, yeah, I'm going to go on 2.4. I mean, my favorite example of that was Before we turned it off, I was sitting in an office doing some support for a particularly global event at like 2 in the morning. I was the only device within like 300 yards of an AP. Like literally, there was nobody else on the floor. It was 2 in the morning, and I'm stationary. My MacBook was sitting on the desk, wasn't moving around. I was just sitting there, and I had so Wi-Fi signal was running in my desk, my system tray. And all of a sudden, I just noticed because I had it set to alert me whenever I had a roaming event. And all of a sudden, I noticed that my computer, which was not moving, roamed to a different AP on and decided to go 2.4. There was nobody else. There was nothing else going on. I was the only one there. So again, it's a client decision, and we can't control that. And the vendors, every one of them, to the best of my knowledge, is very fiercely defensive or defending their algorithm. They don't tell you why they make the decisions that they make. They always say we're trying to make it for the best connection possible. But if we want them on 5, we have to make sure that we have ways to get them on 5. But the client is always going to win.
And this is a conversation I've had with somebody else, and I mentioned it in my my worst RF presentations at WLPC with me and Jake Snyder, where we've had this argument for years now. Yeah, and it all comes down to the band specific SSIDs, because one of the ways we try to influence that is we say, hey, we're going to make that SSID only be on a specific band, so that when we tell the user, the person, we say, hey, go join this SSID, we're going to make it for just that specific band, because we're trying to out engineer everything. We're trying to out engineer the client to be like, hey, we're going to make you be on 5 gigahertz because we're only going to give you a 5 gigahertz SSID. And then we're gonna create a 2.4 only gigahertz, 2.4 gigahertz only SSID. That way we can only put the clients that do 2.4 on that SSID. And so that's a fine theory until you put it into practice. And this is one of the things Jake and I were talking about. And as we were talking about it one day, I was sitting in my office or in my cubicle in an office, and he was sitting somewhere else where he was working. I went and looked, and I found this AP that had 10 client devices. And I went and looked at the client devices, and they were all they all registered as iPhones, and some of the latest iPhones. And I was like, why are they all on 2.4? So what I did is I went in and I turned in the middle of a meeting that was happening in this conference room that had one AP that was servicing this one little conference room that was buried in the bowels of the facility that I worked at. And so I knew that they could only get down that one AP. I turned off 2.4. And all these clients immediately jumped to the second SSID that was running on 5 gigahertz only. So I'm like, those people actually clicked on their phone and said, I want to prefer the old and slow 2.4 network. And so their device would be like, well, you told me you wanted me to connect to 2.4, so that's where I'm going to go. And so then it was like, oh, and so that's one of the things, there's all kinds of problems that we have with, different ways of doing it, because things change all the time, and we can't, we make a change, and then a client device makes a change with it. You referenced firmware. So then we have to make a change. And then of course, if you're making a change in an enterprise network, you have to go through all of the regression testing and all of the other testing that you should be going through anyway. And then you have to put in a change request and get the change approved. And then you got to schedule your change window to then you do your overnight change. And then you just hope and pray. I mean,
and then the firmware changes again.
And then by the time you get around to it, the firmware changes again. So
it's funny. And I can't remember the specifics of it, but this happened. I want to say this happened last year, maybe 2 years ago, but I had a customer, and we found out that we had something that we were doing, RUCKUS, and we were doing it by the letter of the law, by the standards, if you will. And company X, vendor X, not the customer, but one of the device vendors, wasn't deploying it the right way. Like literally, it was supposed to be like an ACK, and they weren't treating it as an ACK or whatever it was. They were treating it a little bit differently, and it was breaking what was supposed to work. And literally our response to them was we're doing the standard implementation. They implemented it wrong or whatever, but you have to do the dance, right? And that's the other, it's every client behaves differently. You started this by saying we all have standards and it's supposed to be leveling the playing field, but you can look at the standards documents and 95% of what's in there doesn't get implemented at all. And then there's like 2 or 3% of it that like every vendor decides to do it a little bit differently. And so, yeah, it does make you do a lot of work. My opinion on the whole, I don't like having an SSID per band necessarily, because then you have a lot of SSIDs. So, but anyways.
And as I referenced in my talk, Jake and I are now starting to go back and forth, but now with 6 gigahertz, now all of a sudden it's like, oh, and WPA3 and out of band discovery. Now all of a sudden we have this whole other, these conversations that were all happening and all our experiences happened prior to 6 gigahertz. But now at 6 gigahertz, now it all changes. And this kind of leads us into a nice segue, by the way, into our next thing, which is, we're talking about client capabilities, right? Like, what is the client capable of doing? And not only capable, but how does it work? Especially when we talk about 6 gigahertz. Does it scan the PSC channels in 6 gigahertz, or does it only look for a 5 gigahertz network and then look for that reduced neighbor report that says, oh, by the way, you can also find this network in 6 gigahertz. So go look on this channel, that's running on the same AP, but on a different radio. Go look at the 6 gigahertz radio that's on this AP, and you can find this network there. I mean, but that's just one part of it, because there's also things like BSS coloring, OFDMA, uplink multi-user MIMO, OWE prior to 6 gigahertz. These are all things that, APs are capable of doing and have been capable of doing for a while. Why don't we see them in the wild too much?
They don't get adopted. I mean, that's what it boils down to, right? Like, some of this goes back to, and I'm not going to be looking at the books directly right now, but I mean, some of these things have been out there or talked about since Wi-Fi 5, Wi-Fi 6. They've been out there in some form or another. Not necessarily these, what you're showing on the screen, but there are things that came out years and years ago in the standards that, and we see it all the time, right? At the end of the day, like, there are things that were a thing in Wi-Fi 5, and they're now being really built out. And some of the argument is, well, the tech finally caught up with it, meaning, the chipsets on both the AP and the device side can actually handle the tech, the theory effectively. Okay, fine. But if the vendor of the device doesn't adopt the tech, or they don't adopt it in the same way, that particular thing just never goes into the wild. It doesn't happen.
And it's funny you said that, because I want to go back to my Wireshark capture that I have, because there was something I found in there when I was doing it that was really kind of cool and interesting. And I didn't know, and it's one of those things you were talking about. Some things have been in the standard for a while. Like, when I was doing this, and this was last summer, and I was using an R650, my favorite AP, which is an 802.11ax, Wi-Fi 6. It's not 6E. There's no 6 gigahertz. It's a dual band. I found reduced neighbor reports being sent from my R650 being sent to an Amazon Fire Stick. I have some Fire Sticks running here in my house. And if I can find those, I'd love to show them off. But it's one of those things where it's like, wow, I didn't know that this was happening, and I've found like all these other things. And it's like, I didn't really know that this was happening, because I thought like reduced neighbor reports was simply a 6 gigahertz thing, and then you had to have a 6 gigahertz AP to do this. And I'm like, how am I seeing reduced neighbor reports off of my six or dual band AP? And it blew me away. And then I was like, oh yeah, reduced neighbor report isn't, if you think about it, it's Wi-Fi 6E is Wi-Fi 6 extended into the 6 gigahertz band. So in order to have reduced neighbor reports in the 6 gigahertz band, you had to have it in 6 gigahertz, and 6 gigahertz or not 6 gigahertz, Wi-Fi 6 first came out. It was a dual band standard. We just didn't have it, right?
Yeah.
So it was, if I can't find it in the next minute, then I'll move on. But no, it was so interesting when I found that, because I was like, wow, here's this reduced neighbor report that I did not expect to see. Oh, there it is. So I found it. Let me I've been as we were talking, I went ahead and found it on here. So let me share it back. So this comes after the EAP exchange, and this was to a Samsung Galaxy A6, which is a very cheap low-end phone. And after the e-poll responses, right, there's a couple action frames. And then all of a sudden, from my AP to this Samsung Galaxy A6, there is a neighbor report response. So there is this neighbor report that came out, from the AP, to the client. And I was like, how did that happen? So I thought that was super interesting when I found that. So it's there, but yeah, we're waiting on clients. Does the client support it? I don't know, but it's always about, what does our client support? Which brings us to the last thing as we wrap this up. It depends. When we talk and we always say, and you always get the it depends response. Part of the reason why is it all derives from this one topic. The client is always in charge. And so because of that, and because there's a bajillion clients, and that's a scientific number, bajillion, go look it up, because there's a bajillion clients, and we don't know what clients are active on your network. When we talk about this stuff and we say stuff like it depends, it's not because we're trying to be cheeky or funny or cute or we don't want it. It's literally because until we know more about it, until we know more about your network, until we know more about the clients, until we know more about what you want to do, until we have a lot more information, because we have this one variable of the client, it is always going to be, it depends. And so when somebody says that, and I think even Sam Clements said this in one of his presentations a few years ago at WLPC, he said, when somebody says it depends, it doesn't mean all of those other things. What it means is we actually now need to have a more in-depth conversation that's going to take a lot of time in order to, get to your answers, because the answers that we come up with are going to depend on a lot of different things. And the primary one is going to be, what are the capabilities of your client? Because the client is always in charge.
Yep. No, and ultimately the other part of that conversation goes into something else that is down on our list a few episodes from now.
Yeah.
But we're not going to cover that today because it's one per episode, folks. You can't get them all. We got
Yeah, we're at
come
it.
back for more.
We're running out of time.
Yeah, but the funny part to me is it depends has become a running joke. And some people hear it and they get kind of annoyed that an engineer would respond with that. But the reality is it does. The client's going to drive that. What are they trying to do? People, again, there's so many people that, it's wireless, there's no wires. They kind of just wave your fingers and make it go away and it'll be easy. But there is a lot that goes into it. And just looking at the packet capture, like you said, I don't know how long you were doing that packet capture, but you had 1 million lines.
No, I only had 830,000 lines.
I round up, but I mean, it's a lot of communication. And the reality is, if anybody's tried to do some really more complex packet captures, they can get really big, really, really fast. I mean, I'm talking about, gigs of data, and it doesn't take long.
No.
And there's a lot going on. So it is really complicated, hence why it depends. And we do it, and some of us tend to laugh now when we say it because it is kind of a running joke. But it isn't really meant to be funny. But people take it the wrong way because they think we're being snarky, but we're not. It does depend, and the client is the king at the end of the day, or the queen, depending on how you want to look at it. The client is going to drive it, because if the client can't connect, then it doesn't matter how good the network is that we built, and it doesn't matter how nice the APs are on Wi-Fi 7 and all that. The client has to be able to connect, and if it can't, well, we've got to figure out why not.
So yeah, 800 for those wondering, 816,024 lines happened in 746 seconds. That was on one channel.
So it's only 12 minutes.
It's just under 12 and a half minutes. So 12 and a half minutes for that test. And I collected 816,000 packet lines in there.
Probably like 2 gig or something like that.
And when you talk to people, they're like, it's funny. I got a packet capture one time, and they were like, "Oh, sorry, it's so big." And I was like, dude, it's like 50,000 lines. I was like, I don't even think it was that big. And I'm like, that's nothing. I was like 50,000 lines in Wi-Fi is like a blink of an eye. It's
Yeah.
like, it's so fast. So yeah. But the one thing I will say about it depends is it's okay to say as long as you follow it up because for the most part, people don't understand, which is why they get irritated and angry. So if somebody says it depends and they don't follow that up and they don't laugh and be like, and then keep talking afterwards, if they just say it depends and then drops it and walks away, then you're not allowed to do that. But if you say it depends and everybody looks at you and goes, huh? And they go, okay, let's, and then they keep talking and they keep explaining, it depends is perfectly fine. So that's it. I think that's it. Let's check.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, yep. So we have so little teaser for next week, or not next week. It's going to be from 2 weeks. We're going to do these every other week. Episode number 2 in the 10 things we wish you knew about Wi-Fi. We're going to talk about more. I should probably put a couple O's in there. Like, more.
Way to leave them hanging there.
So yeah. So that'll be episode number 2 in our series. We're going to talk about more. And I'm just going to leave it at that. That's it. You want to learn? You want to see what's going on in our minds after that, or you're going to have to come back in 2 weeks and check us out.
Yeah, I'm sitting here going, man, folks, if you thought saying it depends is pedantic, now we're going to be talking about more. Just leaving it at that. Not at all
more.
But no,
I think between now and next time I'm going to change that. I'm going to add like 5 O's and just be like, and then like an A, like MOOOOOOARE.
We're gonna take the PowerPoint slide away from you, Jim.
No, don't do that. I'm not a Wi-Fi professional if I don't have PowerPoint.
Oh man, maybe that's what I've been doing wrong all these years. Oh, anyways, on that note, I don't think we have anything else. We've kind of beaten up this client topic a fair bit.
I'm enjoying the video. I like this. I like being able to share stuff. I'm like being able to show PCAPs. And I almost showed Wi-Fi Explorer Pro to look at 2.4, but I held back. But
yeah, well, we showed off some of that in the live stream. So, but
in the live stream,
maybe we'll do something with tools. Who knows?
Ooh, good idea.
It's not on the list. And we've got some new tools that are coming out that we can definitely bug some people to get some demos of because we've got a show. And it doesn't probably work that way. But anyways.
Nah, I got some ideas now. We'll do it.
Oh boy. Well, on that note, I guess it's time to send us out to the music.
Yeah. See you later, John.
Catch you on the next one, Jim.
All right, man.
If you want to contact the show directly, you can email us using the address ruckcast@comscope.com. To learn more about Ruckus products and services that we may have talked about on this or any other podcast, please check the links in the About section of the show.